The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but Captain Taemin Kang drank it anyway. He sat in the command chair of the Resilient Dawn, watching screens full of debris and broken ships. This was his job now. Salvage. Finding the broken pieces of other people's mistakes and selling them for scrap. Not the career he had imagined when he joined the space service 20 years ago. But it paid the bills. "Captain, I've got something weird," Do-yun called from the navigation station. The young officer was staring at his screen with a confused expression. "There's a signal coming through. Old format. Really old." Taemin set down his cup and walked over. "Pirates? No, sir. It's a distress call. Galactic standard, but the encoding is ancient. I had to run it through the historical database just to decode it." Do-yun pulled up the translation. "It says it's a passenger ship called the Eternal Hope. They're carrying 4,000 people, and their systems are failing." Hana Park looked up from her engineering station. 4,000? That's a generation ship. Those haven't been used in decades. She walked over, her fingers already flying across her tablet. "Let me see that signal. Let me see that signal." Taemin watched as his chief engineer analyzed the data. Hana was the smartest person he had ever met, and if something confused her, it was worth paying attention to. After a moment, she shook her head. "This signal is 200 years old," she said quietly. "The encoding, the format, even the language patterns. This went out 2 centuries ago." The bridge went silent. Do-yun stared at his screen. "But why are we receiving it now?" "Because we're in the right place," Hana said. She pulled up a star chart. "The signal is coming from inside the Shade Nebula. That's a dead zone. Sensors don't work right there. Navigation is almost impossible, and ships that go in rarely come out. The signal probably bounced around in there for 200 years before finally escaping." Taemin looked at the nebula on the screen. It was a dark patch of space where stars seemed to fade away. Every pilot in the frontier sectors knew to avoid it. "Is there any record of this ship?" Do-yun searched the databases. After several minutes, he shook his head. "Nothing. No ship named Eternal Hope in any registry. No missing vessel reports from that time period. It's like this ship never existed. Or, like someone wanted to forget it existed," Minji Lee said. The medical officer had been quiet until now, but her voice was sharp. "A ship with 4,000 people doesn't just disappear without anyone noticing." Taemin returned to his chair and sat down heavily. He knew what the smart thing to do was. Log the signal, report it to the authorities, and move on. That's what regulations said. That's what would keep them safe and legal. But he also knew what the right thing to do was, and sometimes those two things weren't the same. "Hana, can we navigate the nebula?" His engineer looked at him like he had grown a second head. "Technically, maybe. But it would be dangerous. Really dangerous. Our sensors will be half-blind. Navigation will be guesswork. And if we get stuck in there, no one will find us." "That's not a no," Taemin said. "Captain, I have to advise against this," Do-yun said carefully. "Even if there was a ship there 200 years ago, there's no way anyone survived. We'd be risking our lives for nothing." Taemin looked at the young officer. "When you were a kid, did you ever learn about the old rescue laws? The ones from before space travel?" Do-yun nodded slowly. Ships at sea had to respond to distress calls. It was tradition. It was more than tradition. It was survival. Because everyone knew that one day, it might be them sending that call. It might be them hoping someone would answer. Taemin stood up. "This ship sent out a call for help. Maybe everyone on it is dead. Probably they are. But that signal is still calling. And I'm not going to be another person who ignores it." Minji smiled slightly. "The council isn't going to like this. The council can file a complaint. Hana, plot a course into the nebula. Do-yun, I want constant sensor sweeps. Minji, prep the medical bay just in case. Everyone else, secure for rough flying." As the crew moved to their stations, Taman felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders. He had made his choice. Now, he would have to live with the consequences. The resilient dawn turned toward the Shade Nebula and began to accelerate. As they approached, Taman could see why pilots feared this place. The stars seemed to bend and twist, and sensor readings flickered and died. Hana guided them in carefully, making constant adjustments as space itself seemed to push against them. "I'm getting strange readings," Doyun said. "Time dilation effects, maybe? I'm not sure. The instruments keep changing their minds." "Stay focused on the signal source," Taman ordered. "That's our beacon home." Hours passed. The crew worked in tense silence, each person focused on keeping the ship moving forward. Taman noticed that Doyun kept rubbing his eyes, and Minji looked pale. He felt it too, a strange pressure behind his eyes, like the beginning of a headache. "Captain," Hana said suddenly, "I've got something. It's big, metallic, and it's not moving. Distance about 50,000 kilometers. "That's it," Taman said. "Take us in slow. Doyun, try to get better sensor data." As they approached, the shape began to resolve on their screens. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of the resilient Dawn, a cylinder design. The kind used for generation ships where artificial gravity came from rotation. But it wasn't rotating now. It hung in space, like a tomb, dark and silent. "Life signs?" Taman asked. Minji checked her instruments, then rechecked them. "I'm reading something. Faint. Maybe a dozen sources? But that's impossible. No one could survive 200 years on a dead ship." "Bring us alongside," Taman ordered. "Hana, I want a full structural scan. Doyun, find us a docking port." As the resilient Dawn moved closer, Taman could see the damage. Meteor strikes had torn holes in the hull. Solar radiation had burned patterns into the metal. This ship had been dying for a very long time, but somewhere inside it, something was still alive. "Docking port located," Doyun said. "It's an old design, but we can make it work." "Then let's go find out who's been waiting 200 years for someone to answer their call," Taman said. The airlock hissed open, and Taman stepped into silence. The kind of silence that only comes from death. His suit lights cut through the darkness, showing corridors frozen in time. Frost covered every surface, glittering like diamonds in the beam of his flashlight. "Temperature is -40 degrees, Hana said through the comm. "Life support died a long time ago. We're seeing some kind of catastrophic systems failure." Hyun Sato moved forward, weapon ready. The security officer checked each corner before waving the team ahead. Behind them, Minji carried her medical scanner, though Taman wasn't sure what good it would do. Nothing lived in cold like this. They found the first bodies in what looked like a residential corridor. A family. Huddled together. The frost had preserved them perfectly. Taman could see the fear still on their faces. Frozen forever. The small one in the middle couldn't have been more than 5 years old. "Veltrin," Minji said softly. "They're a delicate species. They need warm temperatures and specific air mixtures. When the systems failed, they would have had maybe an hour before hypothermia set in." 4,000 people, Doyun whispered. "All dead in an hour." They moved deeper into the ship, passing more bodies. Some were alone. Some in groups. All had died trying to reach somewhere warmer, somewhere safer. Taman had seen death before, but this was different. This was a mass grave, floating in space, preserved perfectly by the void. "The life signs are coming from deeper in the ship," Minji said, checking her scanner. "Section 7, near what looks like emergency habitats." They followed her directions through corridors that all looked the same. Dead and dark and cold. Taman tried not to look at the bodies they passed, but it was impossible. Each one had been a person with dreams and fears and people who loved them. Each one had died hoping someone would answer their call for help. After 20 minutes of walking, they reached Section 7. The emergency habitat doors were sealed tight, and a faint light glowed from the seals. Active power. Somehow, after 200 years, this section still had power. There's atmosphere on the other side, Hana said, checking her instruments. Temperature is stable at 22 degrees. Breathable air mix for Velthrin biology. This section is completely isolated from the rest of the ship. Can we open it? Taman asked. Yes. But we'll flood it with cold air from out here. We need to do this carefully. Hana worked on the door controls for several minutes before stepping back. Ready. Opening in 3, 2, 1. The doors slid apart slowly. Warm air rushed out, meeting the cold and creating fog that swirled around their legs. Lights flickered on inside, revealing a small room filled with jury-rigged equipment and desperate modifications. And in the center of the room stood 17 people, staring at them with wide eyes. They were Velthrin, but smaller and paler than the ones in the databases. Years of limited resources had changed them. They wore clothes made from what looked like emergency blankets sewn together. They carried tools and pipes as weapons, clearly afraid. One of them stepped forward. Young, maybe 20 in human years. He spoke in a language that sounded like old galactic standard, but twisted and changed by generations of isolation. Yuna, are you getting this? Taman asked. Back on the Resilient Dawn, the communications specialist worked on translation. It's heavily modified, but I think I can parse it. Give me a moment. After a pause, her voice came back. He's asking who you are. He wants to know if you're here to take them to the void. Tell him we're here to help, Taman said. Tell him we're from Earth. And we heard their distress call. Yuna translated. And the young Velthrin's expression shifted from fear to confusion. He spoke rapidly, gesturing at the others behind him. He says Earth is not in their historical files, Yuna translated. He's asking what sector you're from. He wants to know why it took so long for someone to come. Minji stepped forward slowly, removing her helmet. The Velthrin gasped. They had never seen a human before, and the fact that she could breathe their air seemed to shock them. Tell them we're new to the galactic community, Minji said gently. Tell them we only heard the signal today. And tell them we're very sorry. No one came sooner. As Yuna translated, several of the Velthrin began to cry. The young one who had spoken first approached Minji slowly, reaching out to touch her face, as if confirming she was real. Then he spoke again, longer this time. His name is Sorrel, Yuna translated. He says he's the youngest. His grandmother was born on this ship, and her grandmother was born on this ship. They've lived in these 3 rooms their entire lives. They grow algae for food and recycle everything. They never thought anyone would come. They thought the whole universe had died, and they were all that was left. Taman felt something break inside his chest. 3 rooms. For 200 years, these people had lived in 3 rooms, believing they were alone in existence. And they were right. Not because the universe had died, but because no one had cared enough to save them. Captain, Hana said quietly, I need to show you something. She led him to a computer terminal in the corner. The screen showed logs, message after message sent out into space. Taman watched as Hana scrolled through them. They sent the distress call to every council world in range, Hana said. Every single one. They provided their exact coordinates, their passenger manifest, their situation. They begged for help for 3 weeks straight. She paused. Then the messages stopped. Because they realized no one was coming. Why? Taman asked. Why would the council ignore this? I checked the historical records while you were over there, Yuna said through the comm. The Velthrin were at war with the Krethian Empire 200 years ago. The council voted to remain neutral. I think helping this refugee ship would have been seen as taking sides. So they let 4,000 people die, Hyun said, his voice hard. They chose politics over lives. Taman looked at the 17 survivors. They were gathered together now, talking excitedly. For the first time in their lives, they knew they weren't alone, that there was a universe beyond their walls, and that someone had finally remembered them. Hana, Taman said. Can we save them? His engineer was quiet for a long moment. Our ship isn't designed for passengers, especially not Velthrin, who need specific environmental controls. And we're in the middle of an unstable nebula. It would be dangerous. That's not what I asked. Can we save them? Hana looked at the survivors, then back at her captain. Yes, but it's going to take everything we have, and we're going to need time we probably don't have. Then we better get started, Taman said, because I'm not leaving them here. Not after 200 years. Someone is finally answering their call, and that someone is us. Sorrel approached them again, speaking through Yuna's translation. He asked the question Taman had been dreading. He wants to know where you're taking them, Yuna said. Taman looked at the young Velthrin and wished he had a better answer. Tell him we'll bring them somewhere safe. Tell him that's a promise. Quan Bei stood in the cargo hold with his hands on his hips, looking at the empty space like it was a puzzle he needed to solve. The cargo specialist had worked on dozens of ships, but he had never been asked to turn a cargo hold into a life support system for aliens before. It's possible, he said finally, but we'll need to strip equipment from the Eternal Hope. Their environmental controls, their air recyclers, anything we can salvage. We'll need to work fast, and we'll need to work smart. Hana pulled up schematics on her tablet. The Eternal Hope's emergency habitat has been running for 200 years on minimal power. If we can transplant those systems here, we can keep the Velthrin alive for the journey to the nearest station. How long is that journey? Taman asked. 3 weeks, minimum, Doyun said. And that's if we don't run into any problems. We're going to run into problems, Hyun said. We always do, Taman nodded. Then we plan for problems. Hana, you and Quan start the conversion. Take whatever you need from the Eternal Hope. Minji, work with the survivors. Figure out their medical needs. Doyun, I need you to plot the safest course out of this nebula. What about supplies? Chae-young asked. The young pilot had been quiet until now. 17 Velthrin. For 3 weeks. Do we have enough food for them? We'll make it work, Taman said. We have to. The crew scattered to their tasks. Taman watched them go, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. He had made the choice to save these people. Now he had to make sure that choice didn't kill everyone on his ship. Over the next hours, the resilient dawn became a hive of activity. Quan and Hana worked in the cargo hold, welding and wiring and cursing when things didn't fit right. Jiho, the second engineer, fed them tools and parts, running between the ships like a messenger. On the Eternal Hope, the work was harder. They had to cut through frozen corridors, removing equipment that had been sitting in the cold for 2 centuries. Quan worked in conditions that would have killed most council species. Radiation from damaged power cells, toxic fumes from old plastics, temperatures that swung from freezing to burning depending on which section they were in. This would kill a Thessarian in minutes, Quan said, cutting through a frozen pipe. They'd need full environmental suits, and probably still end up in medical. Good thing we're from Earth then, Hana said, working beside him. Her face was streaked with sweat and grease, but she kept going. Deathworld evolution has its advantages. They worked through the day and into the night, by ship time. The Velthrin survivors watched with amazement as these humans did things that seemed impossible. They saw Quan burn his hand on hot metal and simply wrap it in cloth and keep working. They saw Hana breathe air that registered as toxic on their instruments and act like it was nothing. Sorrel approached Doyun, who was taking a break to drink water. The young Velthrin spoke, and Yuna translated from the ship. He's asking how you can survive in those conditions, Yuna said. He says your world must be very harsh. Doyun laughed tiredly. Earth? Yeah. I guess it is. We've got extreme temperatures, dangerous weather, diseases, predators. But we learned to adapt. Had to. Or we wouldn't have survived. He wants to know if all humans are this strong. Yuna translated. Strong? No, not really. We're just stubborn. When something needs doing, we do it. Even if it's hard. Even if it's dangerous. Because that's what survival taught us. Doyun took another drink. Tell him that's why we came for them. Because when someone needs help, humans answer. It's what we do. As Sorrel listened to the translation, his expression changed. He spoke again, quieter this time. He says the council didn't answer. Yuna translated. He says his ancestors called for help for weeks, and no one came. He's asking why you're different. Doyun was quiet for a moment. Tell him I don't know. Tell him maybe we remember what it's like to need help and not get it. Earth had a lot of wars before we reached space. A lot of people died because others wouldn't help. Maybe that's why we're different. We remember. With 6 hours left before the nebula's gravitational forces would tear the Eternal Hope apart, the habitat was ready. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't comfortable. But it would keep the Velthrin alive. Quan had rigged the environmental controls to run off the resilient Dawn's power grid, and Hana had triple-checked every seal and connection. It's time to move them, Taemin said. The Velthrin were terrified. For generations, they had lived in 3 rooms. Now, they were being asked to leave the only home they had ever known. Some refused at first, too frightened to move. Minji worked with them gently, explaining through Yuna's translations that they had no choice. The ship was dying, and staying meant death. Sorrel was the last to leave. He stood at the airlock of the emergency habitat, looking back at the small space where his people had lived and died for 200 years. The walls were covered in drawings and writings, generations of Velthrin recording their thoughts and dreams. A whole civilization, compressed into 3 rooms. We need to go, Minji said gently. Sorrel nodded slowly. He touched the wall one last time, then turned and walked toward the future. They were halfway back to the resilient Dawn when alarms started blaring. We've got company, Hyun said sharply. Ship just dropped out of FTL. Council design. Thessarian. From the energy signature. Taemin cursed. Hail them. Let's see what they want. The response came quickly. A Thessarian captain appeared on screen. All elegant features and perfect uniform. Human vessel. Resilient Dawn. This is the luminous virtue. You are in restricted space. You will depart immediately. We're in the middle of a rescue operation, Taemin said. We have survivors from the Eternal Hope. The Thessarian captain, Quileth, looked confused. The Eternal Hope is historical wreckage. There are no survivors. There are 17 survivors who've been alive this whole time, Taemin said. We're bringing them to safety. Quileth's expression hardened. The Shade Nebula is restricted space. Interference with historical sites is illegal. You will depart now, or we will be forced to detain you. These are people, not artifacts, Taemin said, his voice rising. They've been waiting 200 years for help. If they were meant to be saved, someone would have saved them 200 years ago, Quileth said coldly. You have 1 hour to clear the area. If you refuse, we will board your vessel and take you into custody. Luminous virtue. Out. The screen went dark. Taemin stared at it for a long moment, then turned to his crew. They were all looking at him, waiting for orders. Chae-young, Taemin said quietly. How fast can you get us out of this nebula? The young pilot's eyes widened. With the council ship watching? Captain, if we run, they'll consider it resisting arrest. I know, Taemin said. I'm asking anyway. Chae-young grinned. 45 minutes if I push the engines past safety limits. 30 if I'm willing to risk burning them out completely. Do it in 35, Taemin said. We're not leaving these people behind. Not after everything. As the crew rushed to prepare, Taemin looked at the screen where Quileth's face had been. The Thessarian had said if they were meant to be saved, someone would have saved them. But that was the point, wasn't it? Someone should have saved them 200 years ago. The council should have saved them, but the council had forgotten. And now, finally, someone remembered. The last Velthrin survivor was barely through the airlock when Chae-Young fired the engines. The resilient Dawn lurched forward, acceleration pressing everyone against walls and floors. In the cargo hold, the Velthrin cried out in fear. They had never felt movement like this before. Minji, get to the cargo hold, Taemin ordered. Keep them calm. The medical officer was already moving. She pulled herself along handrails, fighting the acceleration, until she reached the converted habitat. Inside, the Velthrin were huddled together, terrified. Minji activated the translation system Yuna had rigged. "It's okay," she said, her voice broadcasting in their language. "This is normal. We're just moving fast. You're safe." But they weren't safe. And Minji knew it. Behind them, the eternal hope was being torn apart by gravitational shears. Ahead of them, a Council warship was powering weapons, and between them was an unstable nebula that killed most ships that tried to cross it. On the bridge, warning lights flashed red. Structural stress at 70%. Jiho reported from engineering. "If we push much harder, we'll start losing hull plates." "Keep pushing," Taemin said. "Doyun, where's that Council ship?" "Following us, but they're having trouble," Doyun said, staring at his screens. "Their sensors are better than ours, but that's working against them. They're getting false readings everywhere. They keep having to slow down to recalculate." "The luminous virtue is built for comfort and long range," Hyun said. "We're built to survive salvage operations in dangerous areas. Out here, that's an advantage." Chae-Young worked the controls like she was playing an instrument. Every adjustment was precise, calculated. She flew by instinct and experience, threading the resilient Dawn through spaces where the Council ship's computers said nothing could fit. "Gravitational anomaly ahead," Doyun warned. "Big one." "I see it," Chae-Young said. She didn't slow down. Instead, she angled the ship and used the anomaly's pull to slingshot them forward. The maneuver was insane, the kind of thing that should have torn them apart. But the resilient Dawn held together, and suddenly, they were moving twice as fast. Behind them, the luminous virtue tried to follow. But Quilith didn't have a pilot like Chae-Young, and his ship wasn't built like the resilient Dawn. He had to slow down, had to take the safe path, and with every second, the humans pulled further ahead. "We're going to make it," Doyun said, watching the distance increase. Then the communications system crackled. But it wasn't Quilith's voice. It was human. "Captain Kang, this is Young-Ho Pak. I'm a human diplomat assigned to the luminous virtue. Please respond." Taemin gestured for Yuna to open the channel. "This is Kang." "Go ahead. Captain, I've been listening to everything. I've been recording everything." "What Quilith said? What you found? All of it." Young-Ho's voice was urgent. "I'm going to buy you time, but you need to understand something. When this becomes public, it's going to cause a political firestorm. The Council abandoned those people deliberately. This isn't going to blow over." "I'm not trying to blow anything over," Taemin said. "I'm trying to save 17 lives. I know. That's why I'm helping. Quilith is demanding authorization to fire on you. I'm using every diplomatic trick I know to delay that authorization. But Kang, once you clear the nebula, this becomes official. You'll be fugitives." "I understand," Taemin said. "Thank you for the time. One more thing," Young-Ho said. "I need you to let one of the survivors speak on open channels. I need them to tell their story in their own words. Can you do that?" Taemin looked at Hyun, who nodded. "Because the Council can ignore a human ship breaking rules," Young-Ho said. "But they can't ignore 4,000 names. They can't ignore 200 years of abandonment. If people hear what really happened, the Council won't be able to sweep this away." "Give me 5 minutes," Taemin said. He closed the channel and headed for the cargo hold. Inside, the Velthrin had calmed down slightly. Sorrel was talking to the others, trying to explain what was happening. When Taemin entered, they all turned to look at him. Sorrel, Taman said, and Yuna's translation echoed through the speakers. I need your help. I need you to tell your story to the galaxy. Tell them what happened to your people. Tell them about the signal. No one answered. Sorrel looked uncertain. I don't understand. Why would anyone listen to me? Because your story is the truth, Taman said. And the truth is powerful. The council wants to pretend your people never existed. I need you to prove they did. Oh, Taman. Sorrel was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. What do I say? Say what's in your heart, Taman said. Say the names of the people who died. Say the names of the people who lived. Make them remember. 5 minutes later, Sorrel's voice began broadcasting on all council frequencies. He spoke in Old Velthrin, a language the council's computers still recognized and automatically translated across the network. He told the story of the eternal hope. He told about the war, the flight, the system's failure. He told about the distress call that went unanswered, and then he began reciting names. 4,000 names. The passengers and crew of the eternal hope. Men, women, children. He spoke each name clearly, carefully, like a prayer. It took 12 minutes to recite them all. The galaxy listened. On 1,000 worlds, in 100 languages, people heard those names. They heard about the ship that had called for help, and the council that had chosen to let them die. They heard about 17 survivors found 2 centuries later by humans, while council ships ordered them abandoned again. The galactic networks exploded. News organizations, political groups, private citizens, they all started broadcasting the story. Some defended the council, saying the rules had to be followed, but most were angry, furious, because the council had known. For 200 years, they had known those people were out there, dying, and they had chosen to do nothing. On the luminous virtue, Quileth watched his command fall apart. He had orders to stop the human ship, but now those orders were being questioned. His superiors were calling, demanding explanations. The Velthrin government, silent for centuries, was suddenly screaming for answers. Young-Ho appeared on Quileth's bridge, datapad in hand. Captain, I strongly suggest you stand down. This situation has become political. If you fire on that human ship now, you'll be firing on 17 Velthrin survivors. Think about how that will look. Quileth stared at him with cold eyes. You did this. You helped them. I recorded evidence of council policy, Young-Ho said calmly. I documented the truth. If that's a crime, then arrest me. But you're not getting that human ship. Not today. Quileth turned away, his hands gripping the command chair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he gave the order. Stand down. Let them go. The resilient dawn cleared the nebula without further pursuit. Behind them, the eternal hope finally collapsed under gravitational stress, torn apart after 2 centuries of silent waiting. But 17 lives had been saved. 17 people who had lived in 3 rooms their whole lives were now flying through open space toward a future they had never imagined possible. In the cargo hold, Sorrel sat quietly. He had spoken the names of the dead, and now the galaxy knew they had existed. His ancestors had called for help, and finally, someone had answered. Not the council with their laws and politics, not the empires with their power and fleets, just a small crew of humans on a salvage ship who had heard a forgotten signal and decided that some things mattered more than rules. Minji sat down beside him. Through the translation system, she spoke softly. You did well. Your people would be proud. Sorrel looked at her with eyes that had never seen a sun. Will we really be safe? I don't know, Minji admitted. But I promise you this. As long as we're alive, we won't let anyone forget you again. Outside the cargo hold, Taman stood on the bridge and watched the stars. They were clear now, no longer twisted by the nebula's interference. Ahead lay human space, and safety, and consequences. Behind lay a graveyard, and a choice that couldn't be undone. "Captain," Doyun said quietly, "the Council is demanding we turn ourselves in. Multiple governments are offering us sanctuary, and there are 17 news organizations requesting interviews." Taman smiled tiredly. "Ignore all of it. Just get us home." Haven's Gate appeared on the view screen like a small city floating in space. The orbital station was old, built by the first human colonists to push beyond Earth's solar system. It wasn't pretty or advanced, but it was home to 50,000 humans and a symbol of humanity's stubborn determination to survive anywhere. Haven's Gate Control. This is Resilient Dawn requesting emergency docking. Doyun transmitted. "We have 17 Velthran survivors requiring immediate medical attention." The response came instantly. "Resilient Dawn, this is Commander Sumin Huang. You're cleared for priority docking at Medical Bay 3. We've been following your situation. The whole station has." "Welcome home, Captain." As they approached, Taman could see the docking bay was crowded. News crews, medical teams, station security, and what looked like half the civilian population were waiting. Word had spread fast. "Are we in trouble?" Chae-young asked nervously. "Probably," Taman said. "But we'll deal with it." The ship docked with a gentle thump. Taman took a deep breath, then headed for the cargo hold. The Velthran were gathered near the airlock, looking terrified again. They could hear the noise from outside, the crowd of people waiting. "It's okay," Minji said through the translation system. "These are friends. They're here to help." The airlock opened, and for the first time in 200 years, Velthran survivors stepped into a place built by living hands, where people walked and worked and lived. The crowd went silent, staring at these 17 people who had survived the impossible. Jiwoo Cho stepped forward first. The medical director was a small woman, with kind eyes and steady hands. She bowed respectfully to Sorrel, then spoke through a translator device. "Welcome to Haven's Gate. My name is Jiwoo. I'm a doctor. We're going to take care of you." The Velthran were taken to the medical center, and the real work began. Jiwoo and her team ran tests, treated malnutrition, addressed genetic problems that had developed from generations of close-related breeding in a small population. The Velthran had survived, but that survival had come at a cost. "They're remarkably resilient," Jiwoo told Taman later. "Given what they've endured, they should be in much worse condition. But they adapted. They learned to survive on almost nothing." "Sounds familiar," Taman said. "That's what humans did too." While the Velthran adjusted to their new reality, the political situation exploded. The Council demanded extradition of Taman and his crew for violating restricted space and interfering with historical sites. But dozens of human colonies refused. Several alien worlds, moved by the story, sided with humanity. The Velthran homeworld sent a delegation that arrived within days, traveling faster than anyone thought possible. The delegation leader was an elderly Velthran named Kelna, who walked into the medical center with tears streaming down her face. She approached Sorrel slowly, speaking in modern Velthran that the young survivor couldn't fully understand. But the emotion needed no translation. "She says you're her family," Jiwoo translated. "She says her grandmother's grandmother was sister to one of the original passengers. She says they built a memorial for the eternal hope. They mourned you as lost. She never dreamed she would meet survivors." Sorrel stared at this woman from a world he had never seen, representing people he had never met, claiming family he didn't know existed. "We're not alone?" "No," Kelna said through the translator, taking his hands gently. "You were never alone. We just didn't know where you were. But now you're found. Now you're home." The news networks broadcast the reunion across the galaxy. Images of elderly Velthran embracing young survivors, of families separated by 2 centuries, finally touching again. The story became impossible to ignore. The Council called an emergency session. Representatives from 200 worlds argued for days. Some insisted the law had to be enforced, that the humans had broken clear regulations. Others argued that laws which prevented saving lives were immoral laws. The real turning point came when surveyors entered the Shade Nebula and found 17 other ships, all from refugee crises over the past 3 centuries. All had sent distress calls. All had been ignored because helping them would have been politically inconvenient. Commander Suman stood on Haven's Gate's command deck and watched Council warships approach. They wanted the crew of the Resilient Dawn. They wanted to make an example of humans who thought they could ignore Council law. "Ma'am, they're demanding we hand over Captain Kang and his crew," her second officer said. Suman looked at the view screen, then at the 30 human vessels that had formed a blockade around the station. Ships from a dozen colonies, haulers, and miners, and even a few military craft. All had come when they heard one of their own was in trouble. "Tell the Council ships they can file a formal request," Suman said calmly. "And while they're filing, tell them to remember who saved those 17 people. Because it wasn't them." The standoff lasted 3 days. Council ships surrounded Haven's Gate. Human ships surrounded the Council ships. Messages flew back and forth. Threats and counter-threats. The galaxy watched and waited to see if this would be the moment humanity and the Council finally went to war. Then Sorrel did something unexpected. He and the other 16 survivors boarded a shuttle and flew to the Council flagship. They requested asylum, not with humanity, but with their own people's representatives who had arrived to negotiate. And they carried a message recorded in every major language. "We don't want war," Sorrel said in the recording. "We don't want to be the reason people die. But we want the galaxy to remember something. For 200 years, no one answered our call. For 200 years, we were forgotten. But the humans remembered. When everyone else had moved on, when our SOS was lost in old databases and dusty files, the humans heard it and came." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "We're told they broke laws to save us. We're told they violated regulations and protocols. Maybe they did, but they saved us. And we want you to ask yourself a question. If you were dying in the dark, if you were calling for help and no one came, wouldn't you want someone to break the rules for you?" The recording went viral across the galactic networks. It played on every news channel, every social platform. People watched this young Velthrin, born on a dead ship, asking the galaxy a simple question that had no simple answer. Under pressure from their own populations, the Council backed down. They granted amnesty to Taman and his crew. They passed new laws requiring responses to distress signals, regardless of political situations. They launched an investigation into the abandoned ships and how so many refugees had been left to die. But the real change was quieter. It was in how people looked at humans now. Not as primitive newcomers, not as dangerous Deathworlders, but as people who kept their promises. As people who, when faced with a choice between safety and saving lives, chose lives every time. 3 months later, Taman stood on Haven's Gate and watched the Velthrin survivors prepare to leave. They were going home, to the world their ancestors had fled from centuries ago. A world now at peace, eager to welcome back its lost children. Sorrel approached him, moving more confidently now. He had gained weight, gotten medical treatment, learned to speak modern Velthrin, but his eyes still held that quality of someone who had lived in 3 rooms their whole life. Someone who had believed they were alone in the universe. "Thank you," Sorrel said in careful human standard. He had been learning. For answering, "I'm sorry it took so long," Taman said. "It doesn't matter. You came." Sorrel held out his hand in the human gesture he had learned. "Will I see you again?" Taman shook his hand firmly. "Maybe. I'm still in the salvage business. Still flying around the frontier, looking for broken things to fix." "Then I hope you find more things to fix," Sorrel said. "And I hope when you do, you break all the rules you need to break." As the shuttle departed, carrying the Velthrin toward their new future. Doyun approached Taemin with a datapad. "Captain, I'm picking up a signal. It's faint, probably ancient, coming from an uninhabited sector about 2 weeks away." "What kind of signal?" Taemin asked. "Distress call." "Old format. Really old. Really old. Really old." Taemin looked at his crew. Hana was already pulling up engineering specs, planning modifications. Chaeyoung was calculating routes. Minji was checking medical supplies. Hyun was inspecting equipment. They all knew what was coming. They had known from the moment Doyun said, "Distress call." "Set a course," Taemin said, "because that's what they did." When someone needed help, they answered. Even if everyone else had forgotten. Even if it meant breaking every rule in the book. Even if it was dangerous and difficult and maybe impossible. They answered. Because they were human, and humans remembered. The resilient Dawn turned toward the signal and began to accelerate, carrying a crew of Deathworlders toward another forgotten SOS. Behind them, the galaxy watched and wondered if maybe, just maybe, the humans had the right idea after all. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is remember. Remember that behind every signal, every call for help, there are people. Real people, with real lives, who need someone to care enough to answer. And if the law says you should forget them, if politics says it's too complicated, if convenience says it's too hard, then maybe the law needs to change. Maybe politics needs to get out of the way. Maybe convenience isn't what matters most. What matters is the answer. What matters is showing up. What matters is that when someone is alone in the dark, calling out for help, someone remembers they exist. The humans remembered. And the galaxy would never forget that.